The richest family in Silver Creek, Wyoming, sold a man 40 acres of cursed white dirt for $75 an acre. And they laughed while they did it. They laughed in the courthouse. They laughed at the diner. They laughed every time his rusted pickup rattled past their ranch gates. What they did not know, what no Hollister had ever bothered to learn in 4 generations of owning this valley, was that beneath that cracked and lifeless ground lay a fortune so enormous it would erase their name from the deeds of every farm they had ever stolen. This is the true story of a widowed father, a 100-year-old pocket watch, and the day the earth finally remembered who had loved it first. If stories about quiet men who outlast loud ones bring you comfort, take a moment now to subscribe and ring the bell. Sit back. Pour yourself something warm. The fire is lit and this one is going to take its time. The frost came early to Silver Creek that October. By 6 in the morning, the cottonwoods along the highway stood gold and shivering, and the breath of cattle in the lower pastures rose in slow white columns toward the Wind River peaks. Elias Caldwell drove the old highway east in his 1998 Chevy, the heater coughing warm air through cracked vents. His son Wyatt curled in the passenger seat with a thermos of cocoa balanced between his knees. The boy was 11 years old and small for his age, and he wore a flannel shirt that had once belonged to his father. The sleeves rolled 3 times at the cuff. They passed the Hollister gates first. White stone pillars, a wrought iron arch with the family brand worked into the metal, a curled AH inside a circle that the town called the Hangman's Loop, though never to the family's face. Beyond the gates, a paved drive ran half a mile to a house with 18 rooms and 4 chimneys, and at this hour the chimneys all gave off pale smoke, as if the house itself were breathing easy. Elias did not look at the gates. He had not looked at them in 19 years. His grandmother had told him once that a man who keeps looking at the thing that wounded him never gets to see what waits beyond it. And he had taken her words the way some men take scripture slow, serious, and only when needed. 3 miles past the gates, the land changed. The good pasture fell away into a wide, shallow basin, and where the basin began, the grass simply stopped. There was no fence. There was no warning sign. The green just ended the way a song ends, when the last note is sung, and beyond that line lay 40 acres of bone-white earth cracked into plates the size of supper trays glittering faintly under the October sun. The locals called it the Bone Pan. Cattle would not cross it. Horses balked at its edge. Even the magpies that ruled every other field in Silver Creek refused to land on its surface. Wyatt pressed his small palm against the cold window. "Dad, why is that dirt so white?" Elias kept his eyes on the road. He let a long breath go through his nose. "Earth remembers things, son. That patch there, it's remembering something old." "Remembering what?" "Don't know yet. Maybe nobody does." The boy thought about that for a mile. Then he leaned back and unscrewed his thermos, and the cab filled with the smell of cocoa and wood smoke from his jacket. And Elias allowed himself the small smile he allowed himself every morning at exactly this point of the drive, because his son was still here, still warm, still asking questions. And that was more than some men got to keep. His wife Sarah had been gone 3 years that November. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the morning he found her cold in the bed, beside him with the dawn just beginning to blue in the window. She had been a kindergarten teacher. She had laughed in a way that made people in line at the grocery store turn around to find the source of it. After her funeral, Elias had not laughed for 9 months. And when he finally did again, alone in the truck at a stoplight in Pinedale, because the radio played a song she used to dance to in the kitchen. He had laughed and then pulled over and sat there with both hands on the wheel until the light cycled green and red and green again. He worked 2 jobs now. By day he was a tenant farmer on 120 acres of Hollister wheat ground fields his own great-grandfather Jeremiah Caldwell had owned outright before the Hollister Bank had foreclosed on them in the winter of 1947. By night, 3 shifts a week, he ran a planer at the Pinedale lumber mill, coming home at 4 in the morning, to sleep 3 hours before the school bus came for Wyatt. His mother, Hannah, lived in the small room at the back of his rented farmhouse. She was 68. 2 summers ago, her hands had begun to shake, and the doctor in Jackson had given the shaking a name. And now the medicine that kept the shaking from becoming something worse cost $412 a month. He had saved $1,500 over 5 years. He kept it in a coffee can on the top shelf of the pantry behind the flour, where Wyatt could not reach it without standing on a chair, and where Hannah would not see it and tried to send it back to him for her own pills. $1,500. In Silver Creek, that was not the price of land. It was the price of a used snowmobile, of 2 months of physical therapy, of 1 good bull calf, if the bidding stayed reasonable at the spring auction. It was nothing. He knew it was nothing. He kept saving anyway. That night, after Wyatt had been put to bed with a book about geodes open across his chest, Hannah called Elias into her room. She sat upright against the headboard with a quilt across her lap, the bedside lamp throwing soft yellow light against the wallpaper. And on the quilt before her lay an old book bound in cracked brown leather and a small object wrapped in a square of blue cloth. "Sit down, Eli. I have been waiting to give you these." He sat in the cane-bottomed chair beside the bed. She unwrapped the cloth first. Inside lay a pocket watch, brass-cased the metal gone the color of dark honey from 100 years of pockets. She placed it in his palm. It was heavier than he expected. "That was your great-grandfather Jeremiah's. He carried it from the day he bought his first acre in 1919, till the morning the bankmen came and took the land in 47. He went to bed that night and did not wake up. My mother said his heart simply decided it had carried enough." Elias turned the watch over. On the back, faint, almost worn through, an inscription he had to tilt toward the lamp to read. "The earth remembers what men forget." He held it a long moment. He did not trust his voice yet. His mother passed him the leather book next. "And this is his journal, from 1923. I have been saving it for the right night. I think tonight is the right night, son. I think you need to read what he wrote." The journal smelled of cedar and old paper, and something underneath that something, faintly mineral, almost metallic. Elias took it back to the kitchen. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, which he almost never did, and he sat at the table with the lamp pulled close and opened the brittle cover. Jeremiah Caldwell had written in a small, careful hand, each letter slanted the same way the ink rusted brown by time. Pages about weather. Pages about a colt that broke its leg in a prairie dog hole. Pages about a woman named Adeline he loved and would later marry his great-great-grandmother, whose photograph in a tin frame still sat on the mantel. Elias read slowly, sipping the bourbon, the wind picking up outside and rattling the loose pane above the sink. He was halfway through August of 1923 when he found it. Rode out to the East Basin this morning to look for the strayed yearling. Found her standing on the high ground, refusing to come down. Below her, a patch of strange water in the rocks, blue the color of a robin's egg held up to a window. The yearling would not drink from it. I dismounted and tried to bring water up in my hand. It was cold, colder than any spring I have known, and where it touched my palm, the skin went numb as if from a long sit on a stone bench in winter. I tasted it on my tongue and spit it out. There is something down there. I do not have the words for it. I will not bring the cattle near it again. I marked the place with 3 stacked stones at the rim. Elias read it twice, then a third time. He set the bourbon down without drinking it. The East Basin, the yearling refusing to drink, the water the color of a robin's egg. He stood up. He walked to the kitchen window and looked east through the dark glass. And though he could not see it at night, he knew exactly what lay 3 miles in that direction, beneath 101 years of weather and silence. He knew what the white crust was. He had been driving past it twice a day, every day for 19 years, calling it cursed the same as everyone else. The pocket watch ticked on the table beside the journal, steady, patient, as if it had been waiting too. He did not sleep that night. He sat at the table until the sky began to gray, and somewhere around 4 in the morning, he made a decision that any reasonable man in Silver Creek would have called foolish, and that the reasonable men in Silver Creek would later spend the rest of their lives wishing they had made themselves. The county courthouse opened at 9. Elias was there at 8:45, hat in his hands, mud on his boots, the coffee can from the pantry sitting on the bench seat of the truck wrapped in a paper grocery sack. Clara Jenkins was the county clerk, a kind woman of 60 who had taught Sunday school with Sarah, and who still slipped Wyatt a butterscotch every time the boy came in with his father to pay the property tax on the farmhouse rental. She looked up from her desk when Elias came through the door. "Eli Caldwell, you are a sight before noon. What can I do for you?" "Clara, I want to look at the list of tax-delinquent parcels coming up for auction, and anything in the county the bank has written off as unrecoverable." She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She walked to a filing cabinet and pulled a thin manila folder and brought it to the counter. He was bent over the second page finger, tracking the columns, when the front door of the courthouse opened and a pair of polished Oxfords clicked across the marble. Preston Hollister was 34 years old and carried himself like a man who had never been told no in a way that stuck. His suit was charcoal wool cut narrow at the waist, and the watch on his wrist cost more than Elias's truck. He stopped in the doorway of the clerk's office and let his eyes settle on Elias with the slow pleasure of a cat finding a mouse already pinned beneath the paw. "Caldwell, you lost." Elias did not look up from the folder. "Morning, Preston. What are we shopping for today? A new pair of overalls? A discount casket?" Clara stiffened behind the counter. Elias closed the folder. He turned to face the younger man with the same flat calm he used on a horse that had not yet decided whether to bolt. "I'm looking at land, Preston, same as anyone. Land." Preston laughed. The sound bounced off the marble walls of the hallway. "Caldwell, the cheapest dirt in this county runs $9,000 an acre, and that is for ground a coyote would refuse to dig a den in. How much have you scraped together in that coffee can of yours?" $200, 3, $1,500. Preston whistled. He stepped fully into the office. He leaned on the counter beside Elias as if they were old friends sharing a joke. $1,500. "Tell you what, Caldwell, I am in a generous mood this morning. I will sell you 40 acres of Hollister land right now, today. $75 an acre. $3,000 even." Clara stopped breathing. Elias kept his eyes on Preston's face. "Which 40 acres?" The bone pan. The silence that followed was the kind that happens in a room when everyone present understands at the same instant that something cruel has just been done and that no one is yet brave enough to name it. Clara's hand had risen halfway to her mouth and stopped there. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past the courthouse and faded down Main Street. "You want to sell me poison dirt," Elias said. "I want to give you the dignity of being a landowner, Caldwell. You said you wanted to rehabilitate something. There she is, 40 acres of blank canvas. Put some elbow grease into it, unless you are afraid of hard work." Preston tilted his head. The cruel smile widened a fraction. "It would be a shame to find out the famous Caldwell stubbornness only goes as far as the coffee can." He pulled a silver pen from his inner pocket and twirled it slowly between his fingers. "My lawyers can draft the deed by noon. Standard transfer. You bring $3,000 in certified funds, and you walk out of this courthouse the way your granddaddy walked in 80 years ago. A landowner in Silver Creek, with the Caldwell name on a deed." He knew, of course. Preston knew that Elias had $1,500 and not $3,000. He was counting on the gap. He wanted to watch Elias say yes, and then crawl through the town for a week trying to find the rest and fail, and come back empty-handed for one more public humiliation. That was the shape of the trap, and Elias saw the shape of it as clearly as he had ever seen anything. He thought about his great-grandfather Jeremiah dying in a bed 80 miles from here the night the deed was taken. He thought about the watch on his kitchen table ticking patient as a heart in the dark. He thought about the page in the journal. The water was the color of a robin's egg. I do not have the words for it. Have the deed ready by noon. Elias said quietly. I will bring the money. Preston blinked. He had expected pleading. He had expected stammered negotiation. He had not expected the steady eye and the level voice. For a single instant, something almost like uncertainty crossed his face, and then his arrogance closed back over it like a door shutting. Noon then. He clicked the silver pen once and slid it back into his pocket. Don't be late. I have a tea time at 1. The door swung behind him. His Oxfords clicked away down the marble hall. Clara let her breath out. Eli, honey, you do not have $3,000. I know it, Clara. You know what that ground is. My Harold ran cattle on the section next to it in '92. The runoff killed 2 heifers in a week. That dirt is not dirt. It is something else, and whatever it is, it has never grown a blade of anything in the time anyone can remember. I know, Clara. He picked up his hat. I will see you at noon. He drove 3 miles down Main Street and parked behind the Vance garage, the cinder block building, where his oldest friend, Marlon Vance, had been turning wrenches since they were both 17 years old. Marlon was under a Ford Bronco when Elias walked in. He rolled out on the creeper, wiped his hands on a red rag, and took one look at Elias's face. What did you do? I have not done it yet. I'm about to, Elias told him. Plain and short, the way 2 men who had hunted together since they were boys could deliver bad news to each other without dressing it up. The coffee can, the 1500, the journal page, the watch on the kitchen table, Preston's pen twirling under the courthouse lights. Marlon listened the whole way through without interrupting. When Elias finished, Marlon walked to the back of the garage, opened a metal cabinet, and took down a tin box. He brought it to the workbench and set it between them and lifted the lid. Inside lay a thick fold of cash banded with rubber bands the way men of a certain generation still bank money. How much is in there, Mar? Enough to put a new transmission in the tow truck I have been needing for 2 years. How much? 3,400. Elias shook his head once. I cannot take that. You are not taking it. Marlon counted out $1,500 and pushed it across the bench. You are borrowing it. No interest. Pay me back when you can. And before you start in on me, hear me one time on this. He set his palm flat on the cash. My granddaddy paid for your great-granddaddy Jeremiah in the summer of '45. He told my father, and my father told me, that Jeremiah Caldwell paid him a fair wage every Friday and slipped him an extra $1, besides every time the work ran past sundown. He told my father that the day the Hollisters took the Caldwell land, he stood at the fence and cried like a child, because he knew he was watching the last decent man in this valley get walked off his own front porch. That is a debt my family has been carrying for 79 years, Eli. Today you let me put it down. Elias did not trust his voice. He took the money. He gripped Marlon's hand across the bench so hard the bones felt the press of it, and Marlon gripped back, and neither of them spoke for the long moment that followed. At noon, Elias walked into the courthouse with $3,000 in a paper grocery sack and the pocket watch ticking against his thigh in the front pocket of his jeans. Preston was waiting with his lawyer, a thin man named Brennan from Cheyenne, who looked as if he would rather be anywhere else. The deed was already drawn. Preston, in his hurry to humiliate Elias inside the same hour the offer had been made, had not asked Brennan to draft a custom contract with severed mineral rights or restricted use clauses. He had told the lawyer to pull a standard fee, simple template and fill in the blanks. Brennan slid the document across the counter without making eye contact. Elias read it twice. He read the clause near the bottom 3 times. conveys all rights, title, and interest, including all surface, subsurface, and mineral rights to the grantee. He signed his name, Elias Jeremiah Caldwell, in steady plain letters. The same hand his great-grandfather had used in the journal 101 years before. He counted the cash onto the counter in front of Clara, $30 bills laid in 3 rows of 10. Preston took the deed copy with 2 fingers, as if it might soil his suit, and dropped it into a folder. "Pleasure doing business, Caldwell. Enjoy your chalk." "I will." Preston paused at this door. Something in Elias's tone had been a half-inch off the script he had written for this scene, and he could not quite name what. He looked back. Elias was already folding his own copy of the deed and slipping it into his jacket. He did not look up. Preston shrugged and walked out. The light was already low by the time Elias drove the eastern road alone. He had picked Wyatt up from school. Hannah had insisted on coming, and she sat in the truck cab between them with the quilt from her bed across her knees, her trembling hands folded over the brass head of her cane. They turned off the highway onto the dirt track that ran along the rim of the basin, and Elias stopped the truck where the green grass ended. They got out. The white earth stretched away from them in the long October light, the cracks throwing long pale shadows. The air over the basin shimmering very faintly, as if heat were rising from it even now in the cold. There was no wind, there was no birdsong. There was only the sound of 3 sets of boots, one small, one large one, unsteady, walking out onto the surface of 40 acres that now belonged on paper, signed in ink and witnessed by Clara Jenkins to the Caldwell name. Hannah stopped after 20 steps. She set the tip of her cane against a white plate of cracked earth and pressed, and a small fragment broke off and skittered. She looked down at her son. "Eli, your great-grandfather walked this ground. He knew there was something here. He could not put a name on it, and he did not live long enough to come back." "I know, Mama." "You came back for him." Elias did not answer. He did not have an answer that would not break something open in him that he could not afford to break in front of his son. Wyatt had wandered ahead. He was crouched 20 feet away over a fissure in the white surface, and now he turned and came running back the way only an 11-year-old can run, knees-high, arms pumping, his small hand closed around something. Dad, look." He opened his palm. In the center of it sat a stone the size of a robin's egg, pale blue, almost translucent, the last of the daylight catching in it the way light catches in a piece of clean ice. "Where did you find it, son?" "Down in the crack. There's a wet place at the bottom. The stone was sitting in the wet. Feel it, Dad, it is so cold." Elias took the stone. It was cold. Cold in a way that did not belong to October air or October ground cold, the way his great-grandfather had described his palm going numb 101 summers ago at a robin's egg blue spring in this exact basin. He closed his fingers around it. He felt the pocket watch ticking against his thigh. The sun touched the rim of the Wind River peaks. The basin turned briefly the color of beaten copper. Hannah laid her trembling hand on her son's shoulder, and her grip was steadier than her hand had been in 2 years. "The earth remembers, Eli," she said softly. "It remembered him, and now it has remembered you." Elias stood there with the blue stone in his fist and the deed in his jacket, and his son's hand creeping into his other hand. And he understood, without yet knowing the science of it or the size of it or the storm that was coming, that he had not bought a wasteland today. He had bought a door. And somewhere in the deep cold ground beneath his boots, behind that door, something very old was finally beginning to wake. The blue stone went into a mason jar that night. Elias set the jar on the kitchen windowsill above the sink where the moonlight could find it, and he sat at the table until very late, writing things down in a yellow legal pad. Soil pH, salt content, drainage. The words his great-grandfather had not had 100 years ago. He did not know most of them himself. He wrote them anyway, the way a man writes a grocery list for a meal he has never cooked, trusting that the act of putting the words in a row will eventually teach him what they mean. In the morning, he drove to the feed store in Pinedale and bought a post hole digger. a 5-gallon bucket, 12 mason jars with sealing lids, a roll of butcher paper for labeling, and a pair of thick rubber gloves from the cleaning aisle that the clerk eyed with mild curiosity and did not ask about. The total came to $117. He paid in cash from what was left of Marlon's loan. He drove home with the supplies rattling in the truck bed and parked at the edge of the basin, and he began. The first 3 weeks were a humiliation. He had farmed all his adult life, and he had assumed that ground was ground, that a hole in the earth was a hole in the earth. And within an hour of leaning his weight onto the digger, he knew he had been arrogant about both. The first foot of the bone pan was not soil. It was a compacted crust of salt and clay so dense that the digger blades bounced off it, as if he were trying to chip concrete with a teaspoon. He bent the first set of blades by lunchtime. He drove back to the feed store and bought a second set and a 4-pound sledge to drive a steel rod down ahead of the digging, and he started over. On the second day, Wyatt came home from school with a black eye. A boy named Cody Hollister, Preston's nephew, had told the 5th grade class at recess that Wyatt's father had bought a piece of poisoned ground because he was too poor to buy real dirt. Wyatt had said nothing. He had walked away. Cody had followed him to the back of the playground and pushed him into the chain-link fence, and Wyatt, who had Sarah's gentleness and Elias's quiet, had still said nothing, but he had also not gone down. The recess monitor had pulled them apart. The school had called Elias at the mill on his lunch break. When Wyatt got off the bus that afternoon, his lip split and the skin under his eye already turning a slow purple, Elias was waiting in the gravel turnaround with his hands in his jacket pockets. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask whether the boy had hit back. He went down on one knee in the dust, so his face was level with his son's, and he touched the swollen cheek with the back of one finger. "Did you cry?" "No, sir." "Are you going to cry now?" "No, sir." "Then we are going to do something better than crying. We are going out to the land. You are going to help me dig." They worked until full dark. Wyatt held the steel rod while Elias drove it with the sledge, and then they switched, and the boy hammered with both small hands on the handle, while his father knelt and held the rod steady. And by the time the first star came out over the Wind River peaks, they had punched a fresh test hole down to 14 inches. Wyatt's palms had blistered. He had not complained once. On the drive home, he fell asleep with his cheek against the cold window glass. And Elias drove the last 3 miles slow, as he could, so the boy could finish the sleep he had earned. The pocket watch ticked in his shirt pocket the whole way home. By the end of the 3rd week, he had 12 core samples spread across the kitchen table on squares of butcher paper, each one labeled with the date and the depth and the location on a crude map he had drawn in pencil. The shallowest 2 were the same chalky white as the surface, dry and brittle smelling of nothing. The deeper samples changed. At 3 feet, the cores came up gray. At 4.5 feet, they came up a darker gray streaked with something almost blue, heavy and wet, with the same faint sulfur smell that hung over a struck match. At 5 feet, when he finally got down that far on the 8th attempt, water began to seep up into the borehole, and the water that seeped up was not the clear, cold water of Silver Creek's famous aquifer. It was thick. It moved in the bottom of the hole the way cooking oil moves in a cold skillet. It carried a faint blue shimmer across its surface, and where it touched the rubber of his gloves, it left a chalky residue when it dried. He filled 4 mason jars with the water. He filled 6 more with the gray sludge. He sealed them. He labeled each one. And then he did something he had been thinking about for 10 days. He drove to the post office in Jackson, 60 miles north, rather than the one in Pinedale, where the postmaster played poker every Thursday with 2 of the Hollister ranch foremen. He boxed the jars in newspaper inside a sturdy carton and addressed the carton to the Geochemical Research Institute at the State University in Boulder, Colorado, to the attention of Dr. Imogen Reyes Whitaker. He paid for 2-day shipping. He kept the receipt folded inside the journal of his great-grandfather. Between the page about the robin's egg water and the page about the colt that broke its leg, as if the two pieces of paper separated by 101 years needed to be near each other now. His mother had written the letter that opened that door. Imogen Reyes Whitaker had been a young graduate student in 1979 when Hannah Caldwell taught American history at the high school in Casper. And Hannah had tutored her in English on the side because the girl had come up from Trinidad, Colorado with a brilliant mind and a faint Spanish accent that made certain professors at the state university condescend to her in ways that infuriated Hannah every time she heard about it. 45 years later, Dr. Reyes Whitaker chaired the geochemistry department at one of the most respected research labs in the Mountain West, and she still wrote Hannah a Christmas card every December that began with the same line. To the teacher who told me to keep my voice. Elias did not call her. Hannah had called her 2 nights before from the kitchen phone with a steadiness in her voice Elias had not heard in months. Imogen, dear, my son is going to send you some jars. I would consider it a personal kindness if you opened them yourself, and if you did not mention them to anyone at all until you had spoken to him. That was the entire conversation. The jars went into the mail on a Wednesday. They would arrive on a Friday. Elias drove home from Jackson with the empty truck bed humming behind him and tried not to think too much about what an answer might mean, and tried equally not to think about what no answer at all might mean either. To keep the lease on the rented farmhouse and the medicine in his mother's bedside drawer, he kept up the night shifts at the mill. He kept up the work on the Hollister wheat ground by day. And in the early mornings, in the strange empty hour between coming off the planer at 4 and starting the day at 6, he went out to the bone pan and dug. He told no one. He let the town think he was a stubborn fool laying irrigation lines on a chemical waste site. He let Preston Hollister see exactly what Preston Hollister wanted to see. Preston obliged. He drove past the basin twice a week in his black Range Rover, slowing down each time to roll the tinted window halfway. One bright, cold morning, he stopped entirely. The engine idled. The window came all the way down. Elias was on his knees beside a fresh hole, his coat off, despite the cold sweat soaking through the back of his thermal shirt. Caldwell, how is the chalk farm coming? Elias did not stop digging. Slow. I do not see any corn. I do not even see any rows. What exactly are you growing out here, Caldwell? Patience. Something like that. You know, my father told me last night at supper that you have been working 3 night shifts a week at the mill in Pinedale. 3. Preston let out a soft whistle. A grown man working all night and digging all day on 40 acres of dead ground. There is a word for that, Caldwell. Elias drove the steel rod another 2 inches into the earth with one steady stroke of the sledge. He looked up. The light caught his face in a way that made Preston, who had come there to enjoy a moment, briefly forget what his next line was supposed to be. What word would that be, Preston? Preston recovered. He smiled. Stubborn. I was going to say stubborn. Your daddy was stubborn too. I remember him. You were 9 years old when my father died. You did not know him. The window slid up. The Range Rover pulled away. Dust rose and hung in the cold air for a long time after the engine sound was gone. Elias watched the dust settle. Then he went back to digging. The kindnesses of Silver Creek began to arrive that month without announcing themselves. He came out to the truck one morning and found a brand new set of post-hole digger blades sitting on the driver's seat, still in the cardboard sleeve, no note. He came home from the mill on a Thursday and found a casserole on the porch, foil wrapped still warm with a folded paper towel on top that said only for the boy. The next week, a half cord of split lodgepole pine appeared stacked beside the woodshed before dawn. The cuts clean, and even the work of a man who knew what he was doing with a saw. Elias did not know who left the wood. He did not ask. He understood that in a town like Silver Creek, where one family had spent 90 years pressing the weight of itself down on everyone, there were quiet people who had been waiting a long time for any small chance to push back. and that the chance did not have to be named to be taken. Mrs. Lurleen Pettyjohn, who ran the post office out of a front parlor in the little crossroads of Bondurant, started keeping his packages a day longer than necessary, mailing them out from her own branch instead of routing them through Pinedale, where Preston had a cousin behind the counter. She did not tell Elias she was doing this. He noticed because the tracking numbers on his receipts were Bondurant codes, not Pinedale ones. And when he stopped by to thank her, she only said, "Coffee's on the back burner, Elias. Take a cup before you go," and would not meet his eyes when he tried to say the thing directly. Pastor Eldon Brackett came out to the basin on a Saturday morning. He was 70 years old and walked with a cane carved from a length of mountain juniper. And he had been the pastor at Silver Creek Methodist since before Elias was born. He did not announce himself. He simply walked from the highway across the white ground in his black coat and his old felt hat, his cane tapping the cracked plates, and he came to a stop 10 feet from where Elias was working, and waited until Elias looked up. "Pastor, Elias, you walked a long way out. I walk a long way most days. Doctor says it is the only thing keeping the knees from rusting shut." The old man looked around the basin, slowly taking in the white expanse, the jagged limestone rim the test holes punched in a rough grid. He nodded once as if confirming something to himself. "I came out here to tell you a story if you have 10 minutes. "I have 10 minutes. The pastor lowered himself with care onto a flat slab of limestone at the basin's edge. Elias sat on the truck tailgate. The wind moved a little through the cottonwoods up on the rim, but the basin itself was still the way it always was, as if the ground absorbed sound the same way it absorbed everything else. My father was the pastor at the Methodist Church before me, from 1949 until he died in 1981. He kept everything. He kept every letter, every record of every wedding and funeral, every note anyone passed to him under the door at night when they could not bear to come in by daylight. The old man set both hands on the head of his cane, and he kept one thing in particular that he made me promise on the day he gave me the keys to the church safe, that I would not open and would not destroy and would not speak of until the day a Caldwell came looking for it. Elias held very still. My father told me he did not know what was in the envelope. He had given his word to the man who handed it to him, and he had never broken his word about it in 32 years. The man who handed it to him was a geologist named Daniel Fairchild. Mr. Fairchild had been hired in the summer of 1958 by old Augustus Hollister, Silas's father, to do a private survey of certain ground east of the highway. The survey ran 10 weeks. When it was finished, Mr. Fairchild was paid a great deal of money, and he was told never to speak of what he had found, and he never did. But on the night he was paid, he came to my father at the parsonage. He gave my father an envelope. He said only this: "I cannot live with throwing it away. Someday it may belong to someone who is owed it. Until then, it belongs to the safe." The pastor's eyes were on the white ground, but they were also somewhere else. My father put it in the safe. I have kept it there for 43 years. I have not opened it. I have been waiting. Elias did not speak for a long moment. The pocket watch ticked against his chest. "Pastor, why are you telling me this now?" "Because 3 nights ago I was praying about something else, and the answer that came to me was your face. And I have learned in 70 years that when an answer comes that is not the one you asked for, the answer is usually the one you needed." The old man tapped his cane once against the limestone. "The envelope is in the safe in the church office. The combination is in my desk. When the day comes that you need what is in that envelope, you come and ask, and I will hand it to you, and you will not have to explain yourself." He stood slowly, both hands on the cane. He looked at Elias. "I think the day will come sooner than either of us expects, son. Be ready." He walked back across the white ground the way he had come. Elias watched him go until the small black figure reached the highway and turned south toward town and disappeared. The phone rang at 11:14 on a Tuesday night. Elias was at the kitchen table with the journal open and a cup of cooling coffee at his elbow. He picked up on the second ring. Elias Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, this is Imogen Reyes Whitaker at the Institute in Boulder. I need you to sit down. He was already sitting. He did not say so. I am sitting, Dr. Reyes Whitaker. Please call me Imogen. Your mother does, and I have run the spectroscopy 3 times tonight. And I think after the third run, we are past formalities. There was a sound on the other end like a chair being pulled close to a desk. He heard her take a breath. Mr. Caldwell, the white surface crust you sent me is not agricultural salt. It is a high-grade lithium carbonate and borate precipitate. The water samples are the more remarkable result. Your brine reads at 1411 milligrams of lithium per liter. To put that number in plain language for you, that is among the highest concentrations of natural brine lithium ever measured in the continental United States. There are operating mines in Nevada producing at concentrations 1/3 of that. He set the coffee cup down very carefully so that it did not rattle. What does that mean, Imogen? It means you do not farm it. It means you do not rehabilitate it. It means you have been driving past a domestic strategic mineral reserve twice a day for 19 years, and so has everybody else in Silver Creek. Her voice softened a notch. Elias, based on the saturation in the samples you sent me, and assuming the brine aquifer extends across most of the basin footprint your map describes, the raw asset value of the lithium beneath your 40 acres is somewhere between $25 and $28 million. That is a conservative estimate. The real number, once a proper assay is run, could be substantially higher. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind had come up, and it moved the loose pane above the sink with a thin, small sound. The pocket watch on the table beside the journal ticked once, then again, steady, patient, as if it had not stopped waiting in 101 years and did not intend to stop now. Imogen, who else knows? Me. One graduate student who ran the calibration with me tonight, and who has signed a non-disclosure agreement with this lab as a condition of her fellowship. That is all. Elias, listen to me. You need to secure your subsurface rights immediately, and you need to do it without telling anyone in your county what you are doing. In many older agricultural deeds, the mineral rights are severed and retained by the previous owner. If that is the case for your 40 acres, you do not own this. The Hollisters do. It is not severed. He heard her go still on the other end of the line. Are you sure? I read the deed 3 times before I signed it. Conveys all rights, title, and interest, including all surface, subsurface, and mineral rights to the grantee. He used a standard fee, simple template. He was in a hurry to embarrass me. There was a long silence. Then Imogen Reyes Whitaker, 52-year-old chair of geochemistry, the woman Hannah Caldwell had once told to keep her voice, laughed. It was a short, astonished, almost helpless laugh. The laugh of a scientist who has just watched a $100 million equation come out clean on the 3rd try. Elias, I am going to put you in touch with someone in Denver. Her name is Cordelia Lang. She's corporate counsel for a clean energy consortium called Polaris Ridge. I have worked with her on 2 reserve registrations in Nevada. She's the best in the Mountain West, and she will know exactly what to do. Do not speak to anyone else. Do not tell your friends. Do not tell your pastor. Do not tell anyone in that valley what you are sitting on. Are we clear? We are clear. I will call you back in the morning with a number. The line clicked. He sat very still. He could hear Wyatt's small breathing in the back room. He could hear Hannah turning a page in whatever book she was reading by lamplight. He could hear the watch. Cordelia Lang flew into Jackson on a chartered plane 4 days later. She drove down to Silver Creek in a rental car and met Elias in the parking lot of a diner outside Bondurant, away from any eye that might know him. She was 45 years old, sharp-eyed in a charcoal coat with a leather portfolio under one arm. She did not waste a single word. She walked the basin with him at first light the next morning. She took 2 of her own samples. She made one phone call from the rim of the basin that lasted 90 seconds. She turned to him and said only, "Mr. Caldwell, we are going to register this with the Department of Energy as a Tier 1 domestic lithium reserve, and we are going to draft you a 30-year extraction lease at $18 million upfront and 8% royalty on every kilogram extracted for the life of the deposit. I will need 3 weeks. Tell no one. Behave exactly as you have been behaving. Dig your holes, work your shifts, let them keep thinking what they think." Mostly, he did. For 2 more weeks, he kept the rhythm of the impossible months he had already lived. Mill, wheat ground, basin, mother's medicine, boy's lunchbox, boy's spelling words at the kitchen table. The pocket watch in his shirt pocket through all of it. It was on the 15th night, a Sunday with snow beginning to split against the porch glass, that the headlights came up the driveway at 9:40 in the evening. Elias was at the sink rinsing a coffee cup. He saw the light sweep the wall. He set the cup down. He went to the porch and opened the storm door. Preston Hollister stood at the foot of the porch steps, with the snow already beginning to whiten the shoulders of his black wool coat. His Range Rover was idling behind him, exhaust pluming white in the cold. "Caldwell, we need to talk." "It is late, Preston." "It will not take long. I have a business proposal for you." He came up the steps without being invited. He stopped on the top step eye to eye with Elias, and the cruelty he usually wore so carefully was gone from his face, replaced by something Elias had never seen there before. Something tight at the corners of the mouth. Something almost like fear dressed up as impatience. "My family is developing a new luxury subdivision on the Eastern Ridge. The county has informed us that the only viable easement for the new sewer main runs straight through the edge of your dirt patch. It is an eyesore and it is in the way. And frankly, Caldwell, I am prepared to do you a kindness." He pulled a folded check from his inner pocket. He held it up between 2 fingers. $5,000 right now, tonight. I tear up the deed, and you walk away with almost double what you paid for it. You can put it toward your mother's pills. You can put it toward the boys' college fund. You can do anything you want with it, except keep wasting your nights out there on something that is never going to grow. Elias looked at the check. He looked at Preston's face. "There is no subdivision, Preston." A pause, a flicker. "Excuse me. There is no subdivision on the Eastern Ridge. The county zoning office mailed every adjacent landholder a notice last spring when a survey of that kind would have been required. I never got a notice. Mrs. Pettyjohn at the post office did not see any go out from Bondurant either. And the rule is the county has to mail one to every adjacent parcel. So there is no subdivision. There is no sewer main." He took a slow breath. The cold cut his lungs clean. "There is only the fact that you have noticed strange vehicles on the county highway near my land, and you do not know what they mean, and it is keeping you awake at night." Preston's jaw set. The folded check came down to his side. The mask slipped another quarter-inch. "You are making a mistake, Caldwell. I have grown attached to the dirt, Preston. Have a good night." He closed the door. He stood with his back against it and listened to the boots descend the porch steps slowly and then more quickly. He listened to the Range Rover door slam. He listened to the engine roar back down the driveway, the tires spitting gravel, the headlights washing across the kitchen wall once more, and then sweeping away. He stood there longer than he meant to. He knew what he had just done. He knew the way a man knows weather, that the temperature in the room had just dropped, that the easy part of the fight was over, that whatever Silas Hollister was going to send next would not knock politely on the porch step at 9:40 at night. In the morning before the sun was fully up, Sheriff Buck Crowley's brown county cruiser came up the same driveway. He stepped out with a thick manila envelope in his gloved hand and his eyes would not quite meet Elias's eyes when he held the envelope out across the porch rail. Eli, I am sorry to bring this to you. County emergency order. Effective at noon today, your 40 acres at the East Basin are condemned under Environmental Hazard Ordinance 217, pending immediate seizure and compensation at the assessed reclamation value of $800. You have 72 hours to vacate the parcel and remove personal property. After that, anyone found on the land will be arrested for criminal trespass. The wind moved the bare branches of the cottonwood by the porch. Snow lay along the rail in a thin, clean line. From the kitchen window behind him, Elias heard the small voice of his son, who had come downstairs in his socks for cocoa and was now standing at the glass watching his father take the envelope from the sheriff's hand. Dad, what is happening? Elias did not answer right away. He set his hand on the boy's shoulder through the open kitchen door, gave it a small squeeze, and turned back to the sheriff with the envelope still in his hand. Buck, you went to school with my wife. I did. You sat behind her in 10th grade English. She used to slide you the answers when Mr. Halverson called on you. The sheriff looked down at his boots. The breath came out of his nose in a long white plume that hung between them in the cold. Eli, I have got 3 kids and a wife with a back surgery coming up in March. Silas Hollister holds the note on my house. I am not proud of standing here. I am only telling you what is true. I know what is true, Buck. You go on home. The sheriff nodded once. He did not look back as he walked to the cruiser. The Brown County car backed slowly out of the driveway and rolled away into the soft white morning, and Elias stood on the porch with the manila envelope in his left hand and his son's small worried face still pressed to the kitchen window behind him. He went inside. He poured Wyatt the cocoa he had come down for. He kissed the top of the boy's head, which still smelled faintly of sleep and of the lavender soap Sarah had once bought by the case from a woman in Lander, and which Elias had kept on the bathroom shelf for 3 years past her death, because the smell of it on his son in the morning was the closest he came most days to the sound of her voice. He poured himself coffee. He sat down at the table and opened the envelope. The language inside was exactly what he had expected. Emergency environmental seizure. Compensation set at the reclamation value of $800. A schedule of the Tuesday night council meeting at which the order would be ratified. The signature at the bottom of the page was Mayor Charles Buckley's, but the hand that had drafted the language above the signature had not been the mayor's. Elias had heard Silas Hollister speak too many times not to recognize the cadence of his sentences even on a page. He folded the order. He put it on the table beside the journal. He went to the wall phone in the hallway, and he dialed the number Cordelia Lang had written for him on the back of her business card. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Caldwell, they have moved on me, Cordelia. Emergency environmental seizure. Ratification vote Tuesday at 7 in the evening. Compensation $800. There was the briefest pause on the other end. Not surprise, calculation. He heard her pen move on paper. Mr. Caldwell, listen to me carefully. This is not the worst news you could have given me. This is in fact the news that ends the fight in our favor. They have just put their plan on a piece of paper with a date and a signature, and they have done it before our federal registration is complete. That is the mistake we needed them to make. Can you hold the line as it is for 72 hours and tell no one what is in motion? I can. Then do nothing. Sign nothing. Speak to no one from the county. Do not return calls from Hollister attorneys. I will be on a plane to Jackson tomorrow morning, and I will bring with me everything we need. Tuesday night, I will walk into that council chamber, and we will end this. Her voice softened a half tone, which from Cordelia Lang was the equivalent of another woman setting her hand on his arm. Mr. Caldwell, you did the hardest part already 8 months ago, when you signed the deed and did not flinch. The rest is just paper. Trust me with the paper. He hung up. He stood a long moment with his hand on the receiver. Then he put on his coat and his hat and he drove into town. Not to the courthouse, to the small white church at the corner of 2nd and Mill, where Pastor Eldon Brackett had been waiting for 43 years. The pastor opened the door himself. He took one look at the envelope under Elias's arm and nodded the way a man nods when an expected guest arrives on the predicted afternoon. He led Elias down the narrow hallway behind the sanctuary to the church office. He went to his desk. He opened the long top drawer. He withdrew a yellowed index card on which, in his father's careful hand, 3 numbers had been written in pencil 67 years ago. He carried the card to the cast-iron safe in the corner. He knelt with effort. He turned the dial. The envelope inside was the color of weak tea. The wax seal on the back, brittle and dark, had never been broken. The pastor stood. He brushed dust from the knee of his black trousers. He placed the envelope in Elias's hands, and for the first time since Elias had known him, the old man's eyes were wet at the corners. My father used to say, Elias, that the Lord does not always answer in our season, but he answers. He answers. Elias could not speak for a moment. He bowed his head. Then he lifted it. Pastor, will you sit in the council chamber Tuesday night? Son, I would not miss it for the rest of my days. He opened the envelope at the kitchen table that evening with Cordelia on speakerphone from Denver and Imogen on a second line from Boulder. Inside lay 19 pages. A complete geological survey of the East Basin dated August 12, 1958. Signed by Daniel Fairchild, B.S. Colorado School of Mines, with hand-drawn cross-sections of the aquifer at 3 depths. Brine concentration estimates that when Imogen translated them into modern measurement units over the open phone line came within 4% of her own laboratory readings 67 years later. And clipped to the back page on the original receipt from a Casper bank, a cashier's check for $40,000 made out to Daniel Fairchild, signed by Augustus Hollister, dated 3 days after the survey was delivered. $40,000 in 1958. The price in that year of a comfortable man's silence. Cordelia was quiet on the line for a full 10 seconds after Elias finished reading the last page. Mr. Caldwell, bring the original to the chamber on Tuesday. Do not photocopy it. Do not let it leave your hand between now and then. I will see you at 6:45. Tuesday came with low gray cloud and a thin, steady snow that began at noon and did not stop. By 6:30, the parking lot of the county courthouse was full. Every space taken, trucks and Subarus lined along the shoulder of Main Street for 2 blocks in either direction. Word had gone through Silver Creek the way word goes through small towns, low, and certain no announcement needed, every coffee counter and feed store carrying the same sentence by Monday afternoon. They are taking Eli Caldwell's land tomorrow night. Elias arrived at 6:40. He wore the gray suit Sarah had bought him in 2019 for a cousin's wedding in Cody, and which had hung untouched in the back of the closet since her funeral. Wyatt wore the small navy blazer Hannah had pressed for him that morning at the ironing board, with her trembling hands taking 3 times the usual minutes to lay the seams flat. Hannah herself wore the dark green dress she had worn to teach her last class in the spring of 2014, and she walked between her son and grandson with her cane in her right hand and her left hand resting very lightly on Wyatt's shoulder. The chamber held 212 people. The walls were paneled oak gone honey dark with 80 years of varnish. The ceiling fans turned slowly in the warm, wet air rising off so many wool coats. Silas Hollister sat in the front row in a black overcoat with a silk scarf still folded around his neck. His silver hair brushed back his expression composed and patient. Preston sat beside him. Beatrice Hollister. Preston's wife was nowhere in the room, and the empty seat at his left elbow seemed not to trouble Preston in the slightest. He had the same small private smile he had worn in the courthouse hallway in July. Mayor Buckley brought down his gavel at 7 exactly. This emergency session is called to order. We are here to ratify Ordinance 217. The immediate condemnation and seizure of 40 acres at the East Basin, locally known as the Bone Pan, due to severe alkaline toxicity and risk of groundwater contamination, with compensation to the current title holder, Mr. Elias Caldwell, set at $800. The mayor cleared his throat. He looked without quite meaning to at Silas Hollister. Mr. Caldwell, do you wish to speak before the council votes? Elias stood. He did not move toward the lectern. He stood in his row beside Wyatt and Hannah. His hands folded in front of him, and his voice was quiet, but it carried. Mayor Buckley, I do not, but my legal counsel does. The chamber doors at the back of the room opened. Cordelia Lang walked in. She wore a charcoal suit and low black heels that did not click on the oak floor so much as place themselves on it one and then the next, with the calm certainty of a woman who had walked into rooms like this one in 9 states and never lost a single one. Behind her came 2 paralegals in dark coats, each carrying a black leather briefcase. They walked the center aisle without hurry, heads turned, the fans turned. Silas Hollister's eyes followed her down the aisle and did not blink. She stopped at the partition rail. She set her portfolio on the clerk's desk. She did not look at the mayor first. She looked at Silas. My name is Cordelia Lang. I am senior counsel for Polaris Ridge Energy of Denver, Colorado. And I am here to inform this council that any vote in favor of Ordinance 217 will result within 48 hours in a federal injunction filed in the United States District Court for the District of Wyoming, and a criminal referral to the Department of Justice under the Strategic National Minerals Act of 1980. Mayor Buckley's gavel rose halfway. He did not finish the motion. Strategic, I do not. Miss Lang, this is a local zoning matter. This is a federal matter, Mayor. She unsnapped the portfolio. She withdrew 3 documents and laid them on the clerk's desk, one after the other, the way a card player turns 3 good cards. As of 9:14 this morning, the parcel known locally as the Bone Pan has been registered with the United States Department of Energy as a Tier 1 domestic lithium reserve. Polaris Ridge Energy holds an exclusive 30-year extraction lease executed last Friday with the sole title holder, including all surface, subsurface, and mineral rights, Mr. Elias Caldwell of Silver Creek, Wyoming. A sound moved through the chamber, not a gasp. 200 people inhaling at once. Lithium. Cordelia let the word rest in the room. The white surface your council has spent the last 72 hours describing as toxic alkaline waste is a high-grade lithium carbonate and borate precipitate. The brine beneath it has been independently assayed at over 1,400 milligrams of lithium per liter, placing it among the most concentrated natural brine deposits ever measured in the continental United States. The raw asset value of the deposit beneath Mr. Caldwell's 40 acres is conservatively estimated at $25 to $28 million. Silas Hollister's face did not move. His son's face did. The color went out of Preston's cheeks in a slow tide from the jaw to the hairline, and his hand on the armrest of the bench tightened until the knuckles whitened. Furthermore, Cordelia laid down the 3rd document. We have here a survey of the same parcel dated August 12, 1958, commissioned and paid for by the late Augustus Hollister and concealed by the Hollister family for 67 years, identifying the deposit in terms substantially identical to our modern findings. This document will be entered into the federal record as evidence of prior knowledge. Silas's head turned very slightly toward his son. Preston rose. The smile was gone. He pointed at Elias across the room with a finger that trembled at the end of his hand. The mineral rights were severed. My family owned that land. He does not own the subsurface. He owns dust. Cordelia reached into her portfolio one more time. She withdrew a single laminated sheet. She lifted it to the light. Mr. Hollister, I have read the deed of sale you executed with Mr. Caldwell on July 23rd of this year. In your hurry to humiliate him in a single hour, you instructed your attorney to use a standard fee simple template. You did not request a severed mineral rights clause. You did not request a restricted use clause. You did not request anything. She read aloud slowly. Conveys all rights, title, and interest, including all surface, subsurface, and mineral rights to the grantee. That language is not ambiguous, Mr. Hollister. It is in fact ironclad. You signed away a $25 million fortune for $3,000 because you wanted to watch a widower fail in public. The chamber was so still that the slow turn of the ceiling fans was the loudest sound in it. And then the doors at the back of the room opened a second time. Beatrice Hollister walked in. She wore a navy coat and no makeup, and she carried a thick brown accordion folder against her chest with both arms, the way a woman carries a child she does not intend to set down. She came down the center aisle with the same slow, steady walk Cordelia had used, but with something added to it that Cordelia had not needed. A long-held breath finally let go. She did not look at Preston as she passed his row. She walked to the clerk's desk. She set the folder down beside Cordelia's 3 documents. My name is Beatrice Carlyle. I was until I filed for divorce 11 days ago, Beatrice Hollister. Her voice was steady. Inside this folder are 71 loan files originated by the Hollister Bank between 1947 and 1989. Each one represents a foreclosure on a working farm in this county. 43 of those files contain altered interest rate schedules, falsified default notices and signatures of the original landholders that handwriting analysis has confirmed were forged. The first file in the stack is the foreclosure on the Caldwell homestead in February of 1947, which took from Jeremiah Caldwell, by means of a falsified default notice, the 160 acres on which his great-grandson is currently a tenant. Copies of every document in this folder were delivered yesterday afternoon to the Denver field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Silas Hollister rose halfway from his seat and then sat back down slowly, as if his knees had not consulted him. In the back row, a man named Jake Peterson, who was 78 years old and had lost his father's ranch to the Hollister Bank in 1971, made a small sound in his throat and put both his hands over his face. Beside him, his wife reached up without looking and laid her hand on the back of his neck. Mayor Buckley's gavel was still in his raised hand. He set it down on the bench very gently, as a man sets down something he is no longer entitled to hold. He cleared his throat. Ordinance 217 is, the motion is withdrawn. This session is adjourned. He stood. He walked off the dais and out the side door without looking at Silas Hollister. And Silas Hollister, for the first time anyone in Silver Creek could remember, was left sitting in a public room with nothing arranged in his favor and no one moving to arrange anything for him. Elias did not cheer. He did not raise his voice. He turned to his mother. He offered her his arm. He took his son's hand. The 3 of them walked together up the center aisle through a chamber that had begun very slowly to come alive again, with the soft sound of 200 people exhaling and beginning to weep and to laugh and to reach for the hands of the stranger seated beside them. He did not drive home. He drove east. The snow had stopped at sundown, and a thin, clean light hung over the basin. The last of the day caught and held along the rim of the Wind River peaks, the white ground gone the soft pale rose of the inside of a shell. He parked at the edge. He helped his mother down from the cab. He lifted Wyatt out the other side. The 3 of them walked a little way onto the ground that no court in the country could now take from them. He took the watch out of his pocket. He opened the case. The brass caught the last of the light. The faint inscription on the inner cover, worn nearly through by 101 years of pockets, showed for one long moment as if the letters had only just been cut. The earth remembers what men forget. He turned to Wyatt. He laid the watch in the boy's palm. He closed the small fingers gently over it. This was your great-great-grandfather Jeremiah's. He carried it onto this ground in 1923, and he wrote down what he saw, and he did not have the words for it, and he went to bed one night and did not wake up. Your grandmother kept it for him. She gave it to me last October. I am giving it to you tonight." He set his hand against his son's cheek. "You will not need it the way I needed it, but someday a boy of yours will. You keep it for him." Wyatt did not speak. He nodded once. He closed his small fist around the brass case and held it against his chest. Hannah laid her steadied hand on her son's shoulder. The wind moved across the basin and made no sound at all, only a slow, soft pressure against their coats, like a hand laid in blessing. Somewhere up on the rim, a single magpie called once and was answered. 2 years later, on a morning in April, a herd of pronghorn antelope crossed the green pasture that had grown back along the edges of the Polaris Ridge Caldwell extraction facility. The mineral plant hummed low and clean behind its closed-loop towers. 340 people worked there now, most of them men and women whose grandfathers had once lost ground to the Hollister Bank. The Caldwell Farmers Trust had cleared the debts of 28 families in its first year and was working on the next 28. The Hollister Bank had been sold at auction the previous October. The big white house with 18 rooms stood empty. Silas Hollister had moved to a small condominium in Scottsdale. Preston had moved farther. Elias had bought back his great-grandfather's 160 acres in November. He worked them himself with help from Marlon Vance on the heavy equipment, and from a boy who was now 13 and tall for his age, and who carried in the inside pocket of his denim jacket a brass pocket watch that ticked steady against his ribs through every chore. Sometimes on a Sunday afternoon, father and son walked the high pasture together to the small fenced family plot, where 4 generations of Caldwells now lay, and Wyatt would take the watch out and lay it gently on Jeremiah Caldwell's headstone for the length of a held breath, and then put it back in his pocket, and the two of them would stand there a while in the wind. The earth does remember. It remembers the hands that worked it gently and the hands that only wanted to wring it dry. It remembers the patient ones who waited 100 years for a door to open. It remembers the quiet ones who did not raise their voices in rooms full of louder men, because the quiet ones had learned somewhere along the way that patience is not the absence of fight. It is the deepest form of it. If this story stayed with you tonight, tell me in the comments. What is the piece of ground in your own life, the dream or the place or the person that the world told you was worthless, and that you knew somewhere deep was hiding something only you could see? Subscribe, leave a like, and share this with someone who has been waiting quietly for their own door to open. Sleep well tonight. The earth is still turning. It is still remembering. And it is still even now choosing who it wants to feed.